Lucky you.
36 best
Tuned
holes in
into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Sandy.
poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they come.
We are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Welcome to Alternate Shots podcast. Billy and I are thrilled to be here with you again. Today, we're going to feature number 3 West, which is called Pinnacle, and we'll get into the reason why it might be called Pinnacle. The picture here, we're going to get back to this picture here. This is sort of a tease.
You're not only frustrated enough to go get a drink of water after playing 1 and 2. I often go over there just to get out of earshot of the people who are giving me a hard time for how badly I played the hole. But this par 3 is really no consolation. It looks easy enough, but it plays, it's 243 from the tips, which again, they have to take their word for that. I would never play there. And then as you get closer, it's 218 from the black tees and then 192 from the white tees, which is where most of us generally play. And as everybody knows, Billy Casper won the US Open by laying up on this hole. What people might not realize is what you see there now isn't what the hole looked like when Casper played it. There were trees encroaching left and right side, so that they even branches that hung over those bunkers. So if you missed it left or right, you had quite an ordeal ahead of you. It wasn't as simple as it looks now, even though it's not simple anyway. And most members lay up whether they want to or not, because it's a very difficult reach on that green. And it's called Pinnacle because it sits up there and it's a back to front tilt. There's a lot of break in it.
There were so many more trees there, especially to the right. I mean, now if you hit it to the right, let's say 10, 15, even 20 yards right of those bunkers, you have a flop shot.
Especially if the pin's where it is in this picture, you have some green to work with. But even if you don't, you can flop it on.
You find yourself in that bunker and you're above average or an average bunker player, that pin location isn't the worst thing you've ever seen. It looks tight to the left side, but so many people will splash it out. It'll go up that hill and come back. And you're going to, no matter how you do it, you might end up with a 6 or a 5 or 4 footer, which is pretty good, right?
Absolutely. I haven't thought of it in terms of all 36 holes, but I'm never flabbergasted when I hit it either in the left or right bunker, because I know you can use the green to your advantage out of those bunkers, regardless of where the pin is. I mean, some are easier than others, but where it is right now, the left front bunker is really not a bad place to be. And if you can hit the ball like some of the guys I play with out of a bunker, it's guaranteed what we call sandy. And me, I like I say, 9 times out of 10, I'm coming up short anyway, or just on the front where it might trickle off. And as long as it's between those bunkers, I'm okay. But like I say, if it's in one of those bunkers, it's not the end of the world.
They used to say in the old days in the Open, if you finish the first 4 holes at Wingfoot 1 over par, you were doing fabulous. Spur laid up here. I think the story is he laid up with a 5-iron, kind of just past that fairway bunker on the left. And then he chipped up, and of course he 1-putted every day.
Today, Billy Casper probably wouldn't lay up because, again, if you're a little right or a little left, it's not like it used to be. When the trees were there, I mean, those trees were right up to the bunkers. The branches were hanging over.
Yeah.
Risk reward was a lot different back then, missing it left or right.
A 3 wood for him back then, or a 4 wood. He'd still go for it because he's such a good bunker player.
Right.
All those guys miss here is much wider than it was in 59. Those straggly trees weren't to the right or to the left. And he would have gone for it because even in a bunker, he would have pretty much gotten it up and down for 3.
What do you think's the toughest pin placement on this hole?
Toughest pin placement on this hole, and let's just say the greens are running 12 or 12 and a half or 13, right? The front right. They put the pin right on the shelf in the front right. You can see it just over that front right bunker. The only human place to have it, to have a chance to make par, I think, when they're that fast, is right there in the front middle or the front left, and you're putting up to it. And you better get up to the shelf. And now you have a 1 or 2 foot, 3 foot putt for par. Or maybe you've hit it right line and you hit the right speed and you make 2. But there's no tougher spot there. Anytime you're in the middle of the green or past the green, you face putting off the green. If you don't hit the hole, you almost have to play defensively and lag it in there so that it just creeps down. But if you're just off a little bit, you come down into the fairway.
And the thing about that is that that pin placement doesn't look as intimidating from the tee as it actually turns out to be. when they put it in the back right, up there behind, in line with that tree over the right-hand bunker, that looks scary from the tee. And it can be scary. If you're above it there, you have to be very careful because it's so quick. And if you're below it, you got to go up. It goes up and down and up. So you have to, understanding the speed is very, very important on that green.
Absolutely. Pretty cool house behind that green too.
Nice house. We won't say who owns it, but this past Open, he set up a little grandstand and coolers, and there were a bunch of members who got to sit there and watch everybody play that hole.
There were a few frescoes.
There were a few.
In the 70s, 50 years ago, a guy named Eddie Basso owned the house. And Eddie Basso was one of the finest players at Winged Foot. We were talking to Billy about coming as one of the few honorary members at Winged Foot. We mentioned Arnold Palmer was made an honorary member. Well, a number of years ago, half a dozen years ago or so, we made Billy an honorary member, and he told us a story about the 3 majors he won the most, even though he came back from miles behind at Olympic and beat Arnold Palmer. That was significant. But winning at Winged Foot was more significant because I think he had more than one person to beat. And geez, there was just everybody. Claude Harmon was playing in it. He finished 3rd. Every good player that he admired played in it. But he hit the ball, one putted 15. He one putted 16. He one putted 17. This is all in the 3rd round. He one putted 18. Now, I don't know if they were pars or birdies, but he one putted them all. This was telling us a story. And so the Sunday they were going out. They normally play on Sundays, but they did because the weather delayed everything. It's going off on the first hole, and Frank Stranahan came out to watch him, or actually came out and watched him tee off. He said, "What are you doing, Frank?" He said, "I thought I'd come up here and watch Hogan. I'm going to follow around Ben Hogan because he's going to win the U.S. Open, the 1959 U.S. Open. Ha, ha, ha." So what happens? Stranahan goes down the first hole, which we just covered, that 460-yard par, 50-yard par 4. Billy Casper gets in the hole, one putts. He one putts 2. He one putts 3, as we talked about. He one putted 4 for birdie, and he one putted 5. He had 9 one putts in a row from the finish of his 3rd round to the first 5 holes of his final round. And that's why he won the U.S. Open.
9 one putts in any one round is astronomical. And
but in a row
is ridiculous.
And the greens are slick. They were hard to read.
It's time to buy a lottery ticket because everything's
time to buy a lottery ticket. The cute story is Frank Stranahan never left Billy Casper's side that whole 18 holes and followed him the whole time. Never saw Ben Hogan hit a shot. Again, it wouldn't be my first hole at Winged Foot of the 8 par 3s to choose if I had to make a par for my life. What about you?
I don't know which one. Every time you think of them, I don't think any of them are easy. So no, this one, I don't think I walk away with an abundance of pars here, but there are a few other par 3s which I would take this over if I was, if I had to bet on which one I'm going to par.
Now, when you have that north wind, you're sometimes hitting a 3-wood, maybe a driver.
I hit 3-wood there most of the time now. Yeah.
3-wood?
Now I do, but I've gotten a lot older. And I tend to hit a high cut with the 3-wood. So when the pin's over there, it's a little nerve-wracking. Actually, with the pin in the back right, which I said looks intimidating from the tee, actually fits my eye because that's where my ball flight ends up being the right flight for that hole. But I still end up, I'd say I hit that green 30% of the time, maybe 40.
That's pretty good. This bunker here on the left wasn't here a number of years ago, but it was put back in the restoration. That was apparently, I think Neil brought that up, your brother.
The short one.
Design. Yeah, it really is a pretty hole. And
much of the bunkers are for the eye, not to guide the eye or fool the eye, or there's several other places like that. And that's the genius of Tillinghast, the great architects, is they use the contours and they make it pleasing to the eye, basically inviting in their own way.
Well, in the one wonders, the eye wonders, it's there. I don't want to miss it there. So what is subconscious?
It's steering your eye over to the other side, where you see all those other bunkers. So
one other thing that we don't see very often at Winged Foot, while we're on 3 West, which is out of bounds. You don't see that very much in play. 3, and we'll talk about 4, there's a little out of bounds. But Occasionally you see somebody go out of bounds here, but it's not usually on the tee shot, right? Sometimes they'll blade a second shot from the left, right, and they'll find themselves in the backyard of that beautiful home back there, right?
Yeah, they'll pull an Evel Knievel and, you know, vault the whole thing.
Yeah. So again, Wingfoot's what you see. Everything's in front of you. There's no blind shots. There's really no water. There's really no out of bounds.
And in all 36 holes, you really don't see very much. You know, now and then somebody will yank something way offline, but into somebody's yard. But for the most part, in all the rounds I play, I don't see a lot of out of bounds anywhere.
Duck hook it left or push slice it right. So the left is the 4th hole and some tees over there, right? Yeah. And then the right is the 7th hole. And if you get it really bad right or really bad left, you might have to punch something just to get it in the bunker, then hopefully get it up and down for a par, right?
Yeah, you're praying for bogey if you've hit it far left or far right. And I think especially far left. You see those trees on the left over there, and it's a scary looking shot when you get there.
And you think flop shot, but those are 100-foot trees.
Yeah, no, it's gonna have to go over the bunker, but under the trees. So if you hit it over there, you probably cursed after you hit it. You do that, someone says double.
Double. That's right. You hit it left, and the guy hasn't even gotten the tee out of his pocket. First, why don't you tell us a little bit some of your stories about horse racing and maybe delve into the topic of handicapping, as you say that they go hand in hand, right?
Yeah, that's the whole thing about horse racing. Is it's a science in a way, the handicapping, but there's so many figures, so much information that you can refer to, fractional times, distances, track conditions, and all that stuff. It would take a year to explain and 20 years to learn, and you're still, you know, everybody has a system and everybody's system works for one race and not the second race. So everybody thinks, you know, my system worked. Well, it worked that race, but it didn't. What about the other 8 races? It didn't work anymore. That's the unique thing about it. But I was turned on to racing back in the 70s. You know, Secretariat caught my eye, like caught everybody's, and then Seattle Slew a few years later. And then a good friend of mine from high school, Watson, I referred to him before, got me seriously into the handicap. He taught me how to handicap. He also turned me on to the Allman Brothers. And we're still friends. You know, every time there's a big race, we're texting back and forth. And we went up to Saratoga together, and you know, I saw my first catastrophe there where Umbrella Man fell and broke his leg, and it made me sick to my stomach to see. So you get the ups and the downs, but there is no elation like the elation of handicapping a horse race and being right. And there was one big race, particularly, it was back when Affirmed and Alydar were running. Mm-hmm. And Alydar was running in the Whitney Handicap at Saratoga, which was 1 1/8 miles, a big stakes race. And a horse from California named J.O. Tobin was all the rage, and he was winning everything he did, and he was a speed horse. And I could not decide between these 2 horses. I was laboring over this for so long, and you know, I get stumped, and then you say, what the hell, I'll bet one or the other. But I couldn't figure this out. Alydar was so good coming from behind. J.O. Tobin was so good from coming from the front end. I couldn't pick them apart. And then I noticed in the handicapping in the daily racing form that a good percentage of J.O. Tobin's races, he went wide at the top of the stretch. So as he was turning for home, he would drift out. And I said, you know what? That's going to open up a hole for Alydar, and with his stretch run, he'll run right through that hole. So I settled on Alydar, and damned if the race didn't happen exactly like that. Tobin leading the whole way, goes wide at the turn, and Alydar shoots up the thing. And I thought, I'm a magician. I'm the Cecil B. DeMille's of horse racing. I can make them stop. I can make them go. Of course, I learned later that, you know, that doesn't always work. And then I went to work at Channel 9 in New York in Times Square, and there was an OTB right across the street. And some of the guys at Channel 9, you know, got into the horse racing with me, and you know, we picked daily doubles and stuff, and I'd go shooting across whenever I had a minute to OTB and make the bets. And that's where I ran into a guy named Lewis. And Lewis was an enterprising man, a city guy, very streetwise, and he was just a bookie. He was booking horse racing. And back when OTB was in Manhattan, before they ran themselves out of business, OTB would take a percentage of the payout of a winning ticket. Some 17% on some bets, 10% on other bets. So in essence, if you won a race at OTB, you got paid less than if you won it at the track. So Lewis, being a smart streetwise guy, decided to try and get all our business by paying track prices. So he wore this Popeye hat with the rim turned down. He had a toothpick in his mouth. You couldn't see his eyes. Jean jacket, talked out of the side of his mouth, and he was right a Damon Runyon character. And I got to know him, and I found out that the one thing about Lewis was he always paid. And the reason I found that out was because I asked him, I understand you pay the track prices, but what if it's a big price? I play crazy exactas, What if my exacta, I play a $20 exacta, if it pays, $240, that's $2,400. Do you cover that? And he said, if they're long shots, I put them in at the window. And if you're lucky enough to win, then I just have to make up the takeout difference. I cash my OTB ticket and I make up the difference. So I said, oh, fantastic. So I got to know him very well enough that I actually ended up putting him out of business at the end of the day because he took one of my bets and didn't put it in at the window. And sure enough, he owes me $2,400. And as God is my witness, Lewis always paid. And he didn't have the money, and he shows up on Thursday with a broken arm. And he pays me the $2,400. And I said, what happened? You fall down the stairs? He said, Billy, in my business, sometimes I got to borrow from the wrong guys. If I don't pay them, this is what happens. I said, so wait, they broke your arm and you're paying, because you're paying me the money instead of them. He says, yeah, but I owe you the money. And I always pay my. So I said, so what happens next? He says, well, if I don't have the money by next Thursday, they'll break my other arm. So I said, get the hell out of here. I said, you keep the money, you owe me. I'm not going to break your arm. You can pay me when you can. That was the last time he booked a bet. But 2 days later, or maybe 3 days later, he calls me at my home, and I lived in Eastchester at the time, and Watson had stayed overnight. And Lewis calls and says, do you have a racing form? I said, I didn't go out of business, Lewis. I have a racing form every day.
Yeah.
He says, check out this third race. There's a horse named Zeb's Hellcat. I'll never forget this as long as I live. So I looked at him. He was a maiden, which means he hadn't won a race yet. And he had been running down at Laurel Park in Maryland. And he had run 2 races, and he'd come from nowhere and finished third in both races. And now he's running at Belmont. Lewis says, I think you should get your money down on this, because there's been about 6 other bookies that I know that have called me trying to lay off bets that the owner's making, or the trainer, or somebody's making bets on this horse, and they don't want to put it in at the window because it'll drive the odds down. I tell this to Watson, and we hop in the car, we go over to OTB, and we're like, this is great. The horse will sit in the back of the pack and catch all these other speedball maidens. None of them have ever won a race. So I put $40 on the horse at the time, which was a lot of money for me. And the race goes off, and they're off. Zeb's Hellcat sprints to an early lead. We're looking at each other. Oh my God, this is a stretch runner. He's going to run him out early. As they go to the far turn, Zeb's Hellcat by 3 lengths. Top of the stretch, it's Zeb's Hellcat now by 6 lengths. We're like, what's going on? He ends up winning the race by 8 or 9 lengths, and he paid $18 to win. We're looking at each other like, wow. So Lewis still owed me this money. And he gave me a couple more tips the next couple of days, and they all came in. So I basically got my money back from his tips. But then he went over, he tried a couple of other businesses, and he ended up in the ticket broker business, scalping. And
At this point, did you still consider him in debt to you?
No,
did he consider
he was off the hook with me the whole time. He was just such an honorable, good guy, and he was down on his luck. But he was so honest, and coming from that streetwise background and a tough life, I admired him. God bless him, rest in peace. I still admire him. So no, I was never going to lean on him. But I felt like he still owed me the money. He was still said, I still owe you that money, and I'm trying to figure out how to get it. So when he went in the ticket business, I called him one day. I was like, any shot at getting some Springsteen tickets at the Meadowlands? He goes, I got 5 in the 5th row. You want those? I said, how much? He says, Billy, I still owe you. I said, well, what would you sell them for? He said, they'd usually be about $200 a piece. I said, okay, so charge me the $200, take it off what I owe you. Then I got 7th row at Clapton, and that settled the debt. So Now you fast forward 5 years and somebody calls me and says, do you know anybody that wants Super Bowl tickets? I've got 10 pretty good seats. I said, I know a guy who sells them. So I call Lewis and said, Lewis looks on the chart. He says, I'll give him 700 a piece for the tickets. So the guy says he'll take the 700. I get the tickets. I go down to Lewis's apartment in the city. He says, I don't keep any money here. I'll have to send the money over to your office later. I said, fine. So we had coffee and donuts. We caught up on some old times. And then I went to work and the guy calls me, did you get rid of the tickets? I said, yeah. He says, did you get the money? I said, I didn't get it yet. He's sending it down. He said, you gave him the tickets without getting the money. And I thought right then, I was like, what was I thinking? How could I leave him with? And then I realized the guy got his arm broken to pay me a horse bet. He's not going to rip me off.
No.
And while I'm on the phone with the guy, a messenger comes in with 7,000 in cash. So that was Lewis. And, I'm glad I got a chance to tell that story because the guy deserved having a story. He was so enterprising and such a treat, and all the characters at OTB, not just the guys I knew at Channel 9, but from all over. We're betting with Lewis. Lewis is hanging out in front. He's got the paper and the toothpick, and people are making bets. And he's, it was right almost out of a screwball comedy. But a good man. And at the end of the day, I called his number one day. I got somebody else. I was like, "Where's Lewis?" Lewis ain't going to be answering the phone anymore. Is all I got, and they wouldn't tell me why. So.
And this picture is awesome. I think you sent me this picture. It's just unbelievable how look at the muscles on these horses and
the jockeys. These horses are going, 40, 45 miles an hour. And it's noisy and they're bumping and it's crowded and, they have to squeeze through a little hole sometimes. They're very, it's a very dangerous for the jockeys, this sport.
So let's talk about, you went to the paddocks. I guess it was at Belmont. That's the third race of the Triple Crown, you tell. I know that much about horse racing. It's a longer race than the others.
1.5 miles, and they're 3-year-olds. They've mostly never run that far.
Right. And so it's very hard to win the Triple Crown, but you've ran in those other two races and they're spread a little bit, but you're exhausted.
Derby, then 2 weeks to the Preakness, then 3 weeks to the Belmont. Sir Winston.
Oh, Sir Winston. So Sir Winston is the horse you sent me a picture of. So tell me what you saw when you went to the paddock before the horse raced, right? Not after.
Oh, before, yeah. No, and you can always go down to the paddock, but you're fenced out. But I was with somebody that got us inside. So I got close-ups of these things, and I snapped a shot of Sir Winston, who I happened to like in the race, and a few of us liked him. And he ended up winning at a good price. Yeah, that was fun. I've handicapped the race, and that's why I took his picture, because I liked him. I said, well, if he comes in, I'll have a picture of the Belmont winner before he went off, and I did. So that was kind of lucky.
And this is not an everyday race. This is one of the top 3 races.
Yeah.
Arguably the best race in all of horse racing, right?
They call it the test of the champion. The spectrum in horse racing is the cheaper the race, the less reliable the information about him is. So these horses usually run what they would call true to form when they're at this level. So you can look at their past performances and you can see their consistency of what they're good at. You might find out they don't like it sloppy or whatever, but they're generally going to run a race that you kind of expect them to run. Whereas at the cheap tracks with the cheap horses, you just never know. The horse might be good one day and not the next. So that's why the best horse racing is in New York and California and now Kentucky, because the purses are bigger. So the better trainers and the better horses go to these tracks. And the Belmont Stakes, if you're a trainer, the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, and Belmont are 3 of your top priorities. Now there's the Breeders' Cup in recent years that, you'd like to win that too. But until the Breeders' Cup, those 3 races, probably the Derby, Preakness, probably Derby first, Belmont second, Preakness third would be, your wish list. Been to the Preakness and I've been to the Belmont 20 times or 25 times. I've never been to the Kentucky Derby, and I say I'm not going until somebody with carte blanche takes me, so I don't have to deal with
the sled. Billy's on the sled going down and back and not having to bother with all the mud and whatever else goes on there. 3 West is the first par 3 that we've covered at Wingfoot. Covered 2 par 4s in the par 3. Have you made a hole in one? Have you come close to making one on 3?
I have not made one, and I've come close, sort of, but not as close as my partner and the member guest one year. And he's not a good golfer. And he hit probably as good a shot as he could hit. He could never reach that green, but he hit a nice low line drive and it rolled up, and the pin was where we were looking at it. And that thing rolled up and came back, and he was about 1.5 inches from the hole.
Oh my God.
I wish to this day that he'd made it. He would, it would have been something. He already will never forget the shot in the first place. And I'll never forget it because I think we won our flight that.
Come back and pretty shortly and follow up with 4 West. We've got some exciting stories on 4 West. Till next time, Billy, it's been real.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks for joining us today.
Billy Harmon.
We really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity.
And please
Arky.
subscribe to the show and hit the bell icon so you get notified.
Movie classics.
New episodes.
Mark Gable.
Hit them hard and hit them off.
Best 36 holes.